In 1998, the city of Detroit had more empty land than it knew what to do with. 40,000 vacant lots. Some of them had been empty for 20 years, some for 30. The grass grew and nobody mowed it. The trees seeded themselves in the cracks and nobody cut them down. There was no money for that and no particular reason to spend it. The city had bigger problems. On a Tuesday in April of that year, a man named Curtis Wayfield attended a tax auction at the Wayne County Treasurer's office and bought 0.4 acres of rubble and broken concrete on the east side for $400. Nobody else had bid. Curtis Wayfield was 49 years old. He had worked 31 years for the Detroit Department of Public Works, most of them in building maintenance, fixing the things that broke in the city's schools and recreation centers and municipal offices, then fixing them again when they broke a second time. He was not a scientist. He had no college degree. He had grown up 2 miles from the lot he just bought, in a neighborhood that had once been dense enough that you could hear your neighbors' television through the wall, and was now sparse enough that some blocks had more trees than houses. He knew this part of the city, the way you know a thing you have watched change slowly, over a long time, not with data, but with the body, the smell of it in different seasons, the way the light fell differently now that the buildings were gone, the birds that had started coming back, drawn to the vacant spaces where the noise had quieted. He retired from public works in 1999, a year after buying the lot. He told his wife, Darlene, that he bought it because the price was right. That was not the whole reason. For the 5 years before he bought the lot, Curtis had been reading, not newspapers, not magazines. He had been reading the scientific literature on urban ecology, the study of what happens to cities when the built environment recedes and nature moves back in. He had found the papers through the public library's interlibrary loan system, requesting studies from universities he had never visited, written by researchers he had never met, about processes he had watched happening in his own neighborhood without having the words for them. He had been watching the vacant lots of Detroit fill in over 20 years, and he had noticed something that the city's planning documents did not mention and the newspapers did not cover. The lots were not dead. They were becoming something. The pioneer weeds came first, the opportunists, the fast movers, the species designed by 10,000 years of evolution to colonize disturbed ground. Then, behind them, came the slower arrivals, shrubs with berries that birds carried in from the parks and forest preserves outside the city, native grasses that had not grown on this ground since before the first factory was built, and behind those, beginning in the largest and oldest vacant spaces, something rarer, the first generation of self-seeded canopy trees, box elders and cottonwoods, and the occasional black cherry, growing from seeds dropped by birds that had been using the vacant lots as stopover habitat on the Mississippi and Atlantic flyways. Detroit was rewilding, slowly, quietly, without permission, without a plan. Curtis had been watching it for 5 years when the lot on the east side went to auction for $400, and he recognized what it was. It was a classroom, and nobody else could see it. What everyone else saw when they looked at that lot was a liability. Broken concrete, filled dirt from a demolished structure, weeds in the cracks, 40 years of compaction from foot traffic and vehicle use, and the accumulated weight of a building that wasn't there anymore. Nobody saw value in that. Nobody wanted to pay $40 for it, let alone for $100. What Curtis saw was something different. He saw a blank page, a piece of ground that had been disturbed enough and left alone long enough that it was ready to become whatever the ecology of eastern Michigan wanted it to become. If someone was willing to watch carefully enough and wait long enough and keep their hands out of the way. The lot wasn't broken. It was early. He removed the rubble that spring, 2 weekends with the rented truck. He graded the surface gently, breaking the compaction in a shallow layer without disturbing the subsoil. He pulled out the glass. Then he left it alone. He came back once a week with the spiral notebook. By the end of the first year, the lot had 13 species of pioneer plants. Curtis wrote them all down. He did not know the names of most of them at first. He pressed samples in the back of his notebook and brought them to the library, where a reference librarian named Mrs. Okafor helped him match them to field guides. By the end of 1999, he had a name for everything growing on that lot and a record of when each species had arrived. His neighbors noticed, not with approval. "Curtis, what are you doing over there?" his neighbor Raymond asked one morning in the summer of 2001. Raymond had lived on the block for 30 years and had seen a lot of strange things, but a retired maintenance worker voluntarily growing weeds on a vacant lot was new. "You're not going to build anything?" "Not yet," Curtis said. "Not yet." Raymond looked at the lot. It was chest-high with goldenrod and wild bergamot, buzzing with insects. "How long are you going to wait?" "I don't know yet," Curtis said. "I'm watching." Raymond shook his head and went inside. In 2003, Darlene asked him directly. They were at the kitchen table on a Sunday evening. She had driven past the lot that afternoon and counted 7 people who had dumped trash along the fence line. "Curtis," she said, "the city is going to cite us. We're going to get a blight notice." "I cleared the trash last weekend," he said. "And the weekend before that." She looked at him. "What is this really about?" He was quiet for a moment. "You know how a neighborhood sounds different when it's empty," he said. "After all the people leave and the buildings come down?" "Yes. Something else moves in. Something that was always here before the city was here." He set down his coffee. "I want to know what it is. I want to have the whole record. What comes first? What comes next? How long each stage takes?" Nobody has that. Nobody has just watched one of these lots from the beginning and written everything down. Darlene looked at him for a long moment. "Okay," she said. She never raised it again. By 2006, the lot had 41 species of plants and was beginning to develop what ecologists call vertical structure: a ground layer, a shrub layer, and an emerging canopy layer, the 3 tiers of a functioning forest ecosystem. The box elders had reached 12 feet. A cottonwood near the back fence was already taller than the fence itself. In 2007, a pair of Cooper's hawks nested in the cottonwood. Curtis wrote the date in his notebook. Then he sat in a folding aluminum lawn chair at the edge of the lot for 4 hours and watched them build the nest, writing down every material they brought in, every approach vector, every behavior. He was 58 years old. He had been watching this lot for 9 years. He had filled 4 spiral notebooks. The city sent him 2 blight notices between 2005 and 2009. Each time, Curtis wrote back with a detailed description of what was growing on the property, a plant species count, and a note that the vegetation was being actively managed as a naturalized urban habitat study. Each time, the city closed the case and did not follow up. In 2008, the financial crisis hit Detroit like a second collapse on top of the first one. The city lost another 100,000 residents in 3 years. The vacancy rate climbed higher. More lots went to auction for $400 and nobody bought them. Curtis watched his lot. In 2010, he wrote a letter to the Urban Ecology Lab at the University of Michigan. He described what he had been doing for 12 years. He included a summary of his plant species data, his bird observation records, and his rainfall and soil moisture notes, all kept in spiral notebooks in his hallway closet. He did not hear back. He kept watching. If you have ever paid attention to something that nobody else thought was worth looking at, if you have ever kept a record of something because it felt like the record mattered, even when nobody asked for it, even when nobody would have noticed if you stopped, stay with me. This is one of those stories. Curtis Wayfield had no institutional affiliation. He had no grant funding, no peer review, no publication record, no letters after his name. He had 16 years of handwritten data in 9 spiral notebooks stored in a hallway closet in a house on the east side of Detroit. And in 2016, a researcher at the University of Michigan, who had been trying to answer a question about urban rewilding for 6 years, drove to that house, knocked on the door, and asked if she could see the notebooks. She was not prepared for what was in them. Dr. Amara Osei Bonsu was an assistant professor of urban ecology at the University of Michigan School for Environment and Sustainability. She had been studying spontaneous urban rewilding, the unplanned, unmanaged return of ecological function to post-industrial urban land. For 7 years, her problem was data. Rewilding studies typically start when someone notices a site that is already mid-process. By then, the early colonization data is gone. Nobody had been watching from the beginning. Nobody had a complete record of succession from bare, disturbed ground through to mature canopy, taken on the same site, over a period long enough to show the full trajectory. She had written to Curtis in 2010 and then, in the chaos of a grant renewal period, failed to follow up. In 2016, a graduate student found his letter in a filing cabinet and forwarded it to her, with a note, "I think this is the site you've been looking for." She drove to Detroit the following Saturday. Curtis opened the door and showed her the notebooks. She sat at his kitchen table for 3 hours. His plant species records showed 73 species over 18 years. His bird observation logs documented 31 species using the lot as habitat, including 7 species of conservation concern that had not been formally recorded in that census tract since the 1972. His rainfall and soil moisture records taken with a hardware store rain gauge and a hand probe, both purchased at the hardware store on Gratiot Avenue, showed a measurable infiltration advantage over surrounding compacted lots, consistent with restored soil porosity in the absence of vehicle traffic and construction, and his succession timeline, the complete record of what arrived, in what order, in what season, over 18 unbroken years, was the most comprehensive, spontaneous, urban rewilding dataset in the published literature, because nothing like it existed. Nobody had ever watched a vacant lot this carefully for this long. Mr. Wayfield, Dr. Osei Bonsu said, "Do you understand what you have here?" "I have what I watched," Curtis said. "What you watched is an 18-year longitudinal succession study on spontaneous urban habitat formation. This doesn't exist in the literature. This is..." She stopped. "Can I bring my graduate students?" "You can bring whoever you need," Curtis said. "I'll make coffee." The study that Dr. Osei Bonsu and her team published in 2019, based on Curtis Wayfield's 18 years of notebooks combined with their own 2 years of field sampling and soil analysis, was titled Spontaneous Succession Trajectories in Post-Industrial Urban Vacancies, an 18-year longitudinal case study, Detroit, Michigan. It was published in the journal Urban Ecosystems. It was downloaded 11,000 times in its first 6 months. The paper documented 3 things that urban planners had theorized, but never had data to prove. First, that unmanaged urban vacant lots, given sufficient time and the absence of compaction and chemical input, develop genuine ecological functioning soil food webs, multi-trophic food chains, breeding habitat for species of conservation concern, without any human intervention beyond initial debris removal. Second, that the succession timeline is predictable and consistent, that the same ecological stages appear in the same order, in the same climate zone, making it possible to design urban rewilding programs with known timelines, rather than guesswork. Third, that the soil restoration benefits of spontaneous rewilding, increased porosity, increased organic matter, or increased water infiltration, begin appearing measurably within 6 years, and compound over time, making spontaneous rewilding a viable and extremely low-cost tool for managing urban stormwater. Detroit City Planning Department cited the paper in its 2020 Vacant Land Strategy. The City of Cleveland cited it in its Green Infrastructure Revision in 2021. The City of Baltimore's Department of Public Works cited it in a 2022 stormwater management proposal that redirected $4.3 million away from engineered retention basins and toward managed naturalization of city-owned vacant lots. 3 cities, 1 retired maintenance worker, 9 spiral notebooks, $400. In 2021, The University of Michigan designated Curtis Wayfield's lot as an urban ecological research site, one of only 4 in the state. A small weatherproof sign was installed at the fence line. It reads, Wayfield Site, Continuous Ecological Observation, 1998 present. Dr. Osei Bonsu brings her graduate students to the lot twice a year. Curtis walks them through it himself. He is 72 years old. He still brings his notebook. Everyone asks me what I was trying to prove, he told one of her students on a cold October morning in 2022, standing under the cottonwood, where the Cooper's hawks had first nested. 15 years earlier, the tree was now 38 feet tall. I wasn't trying to prove anything, he said. I was trying to pay attention. There's a difference. The student wrote it down. Curtis noticed that. You keeping records? He said. Yes, sir, the student said. Good, Curtis said. Don't stop. He walked back to his folding chair at the edge of the lot and sat down. Above him, in the canopy that had grown from nothing on ground, the city had sold for $400 because nobody wanted it. A Cooper's hawk called once and was quiet. Curtis wrote down the time. The city of Detroit has 40,000 vacant lots. Most of them are still empty. Most of them are still listed as liabilities in the municipal balance sheet. Land that generates no tax revenue, attracts dumping, requires maintenance the city cannot afford, and represents, in the accounting language of municipal government, a problem to be solved. Curtis Wayfield looked at a piece of ground that fit that description exactly, paid $400 for it, and spent 18 years asking a different question. Not, what can we build here? Not, how do we fix this? But, what is already happening here? If we stop long enough to look. The answer was in 9 spiral notebooks in a hallway closet. It still is. Some of the most valuable things in the world don't look like anything from the outside. They just need someone patient enough to watch.